Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my Friday Reads video for December 13th, 2019. Well, to start with, I finished the book I intended to finish for last week's video. This is The Wangs versus the World by Jade Chang, or perhaps I should say The Wangs versus the World, since I believe that's more accurate, and there's a whole section in here about the American diphthong. And I guess I don't have much more to say about it than I said last week. I still found it to be very amusing and enticing. Just the writing was really good. The issues explored were really intriguing. I guess I just want to give more props to the characters that I kind of looked over, particularly the patriarch of the family, Charles Wang, who, is a bit of a jerk face, but was certainly very intriguing to follow. As all driven, egotistical people might be to an extent. Particularly when they're a little down on their luck, so they're a little more human that way. And I gotta say, I just really appreciated getting this perspective from someone Chinese, basically, because, I'm so used to hearing about things from a Western perspective, about Western history and Western culture shaping the way that people view themselves, but here he is shaped by Chinese history and sort of the mythos of the culture, and also the history of more recent history post-World War II and with the communism. And I mean, I guess it's reminding me of things that I would want to learn more about in a nonfiction setting as well, but the fiction setting gives it such a veneer of learning how these things affect people. I also like how things turned out for his kids and his wife. I thought that they all got a little more dimension in a way, especially the wife. I think she kind of was just sort of a Beverly Hills shallow person in the beginning, but she seemed to have more dimension at the end. And his oldest daughter, finally picked the right guy and got out of stupid toxic relationships. Anyway, now I'm just getting into spoilery territory here, but luckily I'm being vague. But anyway, I really feel like this is a book that deserved the hype that it got a couple of years ago, and it still continues to stand up. So if you're looking for backlist literary fiction, maybe this one. Then I finished another book this week, just earlier today, huzzah! This is The Liar by Ayelet Gundar-Goshen, and translated from the Hebrew by Sondra Silverston. I actually listened to it on audio, but I also got the physical copy. Hopefully that'll help me with writing the review, and maybe will deepen some of my thoughts. Although I liked the audiobook, it was alright. This is a story primarily about a 17-year-old girl, Nofar, who lives in Israel, who, after a really painful, asinine altercation, it just sort of spirals out of control. She's verbally abused by this irate, egotistical customer in a situation that kind of goes off the rails a bit, and he ends up following her as she runs away, and it looks like he's about to assault her, and she screams out and attracts attention, and then the story sort of runs away from her. I suppose I'm forgiving her more than I should, given the events of the narrative, where she lets the story run on for a very long time until he's almost about to go to trial for something he didn't really do. One thing I was concerned about when I picked up this book is, the idea of probing an event that doesn't happen very often. The event of, the event of the fake rape cry rather than all of the more real ones that don't go reported. But I don't feel like that's what Gundar-Goshen was trying to do, like trying to make some sort of political statement. She, in fact, included some references to, real assault cases, or, ones that actually happened, I mean, in this fictional world. So not to say that this is indicative of some societal, female plot to enslave the male race or what have you. Anyway, this book is very much about the lies that people tell themselves, and what they do to relationships and to personal perception about the self. I feel like maybe she uses a little bit of a heavy hand in a way that some people wouldn't like. I don't know if heavy hand is the right word. It's a narrative choice. There's this omnipotent narrator who is really sort of guiding us along and sometimes speaking in a plural person about like society at large. Although mostly it's just sort of giving deeper insight, deeper than the characters would have about themselves, about what they're up to. And, you can tell the Gundar-Goshen was a psychologist. Because we're following Nofar, we're also following the boy upstairs who saw what really happened and they enter into a relationship. We're following the man who was wrongly accused. Trying to cut around sirens here, sorry. Anyway, we also follow other people like her parents and the detective a little bit, stuff like that. I feel it gives a maximist, intriguing style that can probe both the specifics of human behavior and then the generalities. Although I do think there was this secondary storyline that really, I don't know if you could even call it secondary because it was so trifling within the narrative about the friend of a Holocaust survivor who took on her friend's identity as a way to sort of memorialize her friend who recently died, and then that takes on a life of its own. And it only intersects kind of briefly and somewhat conveniently with Nofar's story. I feel like maybe she should have, put that one to the side. That it started to feel like she was bringing up examples in a psychology class, when she brought in that side story. And I feel like the main narrative didn't really lose anything or gain anything with it. This is also, of course, a really high-stakes case. In fact, even more high stakes than I'm making it seem with the idea of a trial looming, because the man who was a verbal dick to her, he really wasn't the best person, so that complicates things a little bit. But anyway, he was some C-list celebrity, so it kind of took on a life of its own in the press. And I feel like that's something else that she's saying in this too, because Nofar, who's 17, is sort of propelled along too by all of the fame of this, or the fleeting fame, because she's invited to be on talk shows about assault, and she's even offered free merchandise from people who, want to, tout their wares. It all, I think, makes a lot more sense within the narrative. I mean, there's a lot of high-stakes drama, but I feel like it doesn't go too over the top, or maybe I'm just in that, that phase right now where I'm thinking that fiction is unfairly critiqued for some high stakes sometimes, when you can read memoirs and things and know that that type of stuff can happen in reality. So I feel like this doesn't go too far. I mean, there are like really high stakes here, and Nofar spends the entire book really in a bit of a state of crisis, although also dealing with some other stuff as well about her self-esteem and about her relationships. But I feel like it's all, for the most part, believable and not too over the top. I'm starting to grow a soft spot for this author, I think, in the way that she probes human relationships. I don't think this one is as strong as the last book I've read by her, Waking Lions, but I think that she's someone that I'll continue to want to watch. Now it's time for a brief update on my progress through this book, On Middle Ground, A History of the Jews of Baltimore by Eric L. Goldstein and Deborah R. Weiner. I'm still not very far along, a couple more chapters in. I guess I'm more okay with taking this slowly. It can be rather dense. You get some historians talking about history, and they have to say the same information in 5 different ways in 5 consecutive paragraphs. But this is a deep dive into the history of Jews in Baltimore. Right now, I'm around the Civil War. We've been dancing around it for the past several sections. It's interesting. I read a book by Goldstein last year on the price of whiteness for Jews in America that sort of it chronicles a lot of the same history that I'm reading about here. I think this book is ultimately going to go beyond the scope of his first book. But the ways that he and Weiner, who's more local, are talking about Baltimore Jews, I'm trying to think of the ways that they're similar and different to American Jews in the whole country. And so a lot of the ways they're similar is that there's this negotiation in Baltimore, as in other places, about whiteness and about if Jews are white. That's something that's obviously of interest to Goldstein, and it's such a big part of the American mythos, really, because well, I mean, at least from all of the nonfiction I've read that's predominantly about American Jews, but also more about our society as a whole, there's that idea of manifest destiny and of white culture always trying to assert its dominance. And in that way, Jews were invited into the pack the way that they never were in Europe. I mean, they touch a little bit on attempts at emancipation in Europe around this time that are on and off depending on which country or which city or state. But it was never as secure as it was in America that Jews could be invited in the fold. But at the same time, it was still very conditional. And a lot of times I think Jews were very careful in America about how they talked about issues, particularly around African Americans, because of this conditional whiteness. And, you know, in politics, like, they're kind of caught between these two political parties, and both of which are, like, white supremacist. At least that's how they're described here. It's just that one is also anti-immigration. So Jews are flocking to the party that doesn't have the anti-immigration part so that they can be safer. But there is no non-white supremacist major party at the time, as it were, because, you know, talking about around the Civil War, so slavery is still in effect. And it's also going into changes in religious life, but I think a major message they're trying to say here that it's not so cut and dry as, you know, a bunch of Reform Jews saying, we really want to change things ideologically. It's more complicated than that, and within the Baltimore synagogues they can go into a lot of detail about the types of changes they did and didn't make, and they posit the thesis that it really, for most Jews, it's about, like, in their private lives they became more secular because of what was available to them, but in their synagogue lives they actually were more traditional because they could still maintain those traditions more easily there. And it also talks a bit just about Baltimore's interesting position. Jews here, like in a lot of cities in America, were primarily merchants, but Baltimore turned into really a good port, I guess, just for everybody because of being sort of central, like between the North and the South. And so for a while, you know, that was good for trade, although, you know, now in the Civil War, not so much, when there's not so much trade between the North and the South, or at least trade that is endorsed, as it were. Jews are starting to get into some trouble with their trading habits during the Civil War because they relied so much. I think everybody does, but particularly Jews with ethnic ties rely on trading with different Jews, even in the South. But, you know, during the war, the Union was not cool with that. So yeah, that's where I am now. It's a lot of great, interesting, detailed information. Hoping to make it further along next week. Who knows, maybe into the next century, hopefully. And finally, next on the docket, I think I'm going to go to Modern Lovers by Emma Straub. I'm not sure why exactly I've been so keen on reading this at the same time as the Wangs versus the World, but for several months now I had both the Wangs versus the World and this on my docket at the same time. And I'd think to myself, okay, this is the month where I'm going to read the Wangs versus the World and Modern Lovers. And then, you know, my reading plans would change, and then I'd take both books and put them down a month and etc. So it feels like I should just be reading this now. I mean, I don't know. I didn't buy this at the same time I bought the Wangs versus the World. I bought this a couple of years ago at Rainy Day Books in Kansas City when visiting family. I actually took a bookstagram picture that I think might be my prettiest bookstagram picture of all. So I'll link that down below. I mean, these colors really did well in the photo, I think, maybe outside the store. But anyway, I'll read from the back. An instant New York Times bestseller about a tight-knit group of friends from college and what it means to finally grow up well after adulthood has set in. Friends and former college bandmates Elizabeth and Andrew and Zoe have watched each other marry, buy real estate, and start businesses and families, all while trying to hold on to their identities of their youth. But nothing ages them like suddenly having to pass the torch on to their own offspring. Now nearing 50, they all live within shouting distance, deep in gentrified Brooklyn, and the trappings of the adult world seem to have arrived with ease. But the summer that their children reach maturity and start sleeping together, the fabric of the adults' lives suddenly begins to unravel, and the secrets and revelations are finally let loose that can never be reclaimed. Straub packs wisdom, insight, and humor together in a satisfying book about neighbors and nosiness, ambition and pleasure, and the excitement of youth, the shock of middle age, and the fact that our passions, be they for food or friendship or music, never go away. They just evolve and grow along with us. So yeah, this has a lot of ticks that I love. We have family and friendship drama, that we have how things change over decades and, passing from generation to generation. And this is also something that is similar to the Wangs versus the World, is literary fiction from yesteryear that had a lot of hype. So now I guess I'll get to see if I think the hype was deserved all these years later. So that about covers it for me now. Another week come and gone, and I should wrap this up because I'm looking at a very low battery. But anyway, my plans coming up are that my work is having a holiday party downtown in DC. And the same day, a couple of hours later, I think I'm going to go to this local book fair that I heard about last year right after it happened. It's very small. It's just taking place at a small cafe in Tacoma Park, which is one town over from me, and it's a bunch of local authors touting their wares. So I'm curious to check it out. Curious to see the type of people who are there, and maybe trying to scope whether if I get something published in the future, if that could be an option for me. But I don't know. I don't think I'm going to be doing any actual book buying for family there, because I already have done a lot of the gift buying for everybody. But who knows, I might end up buying something for myself, because I'm not sure I can actually go a month without buying at least one book. I'll have to, at the end of the month, I think I'll be tallying up all of my monthly book hauls to see exactly what I did do. Sometimes I was trying to use library hauls as an excuse to not buy as much, but we'll see how it went. So I'll link to the Tacoma Park Book Fair down below as well. And I hope you all are having good plans as well for the weekend, and are happy with how your reading and your buying and your so forth are going for 2019 as we wrap it on up. So thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.